All right. Well, welcome to the Conference on Collaborative Governance. I think probably from looking around the audience, it's probably a gathering of the hardcore, or people who've been thinking about this for a long time. Hope that we can come up with something new to say about it and have a lively engagement and discussion as we go along. Let me first provide a welcome to everyone from the University of Missouri. Its center, it's clearly working now, isn't it? Yeah. Center for the Study of Dispute Resolution, which is perennially one of the top law school programs in dispute resolution, and which, at least since my presence there, includes the aspect of using collaborative processes for government purposes, and hence this program here. So let me begin by giving an overview of the conference and what's happening, some updates. So we're going to have three panels. The first panel this afternoon is going to look at the use of collaboration to set policy, to make policy. And as such, it's going to look at a bunch of things. What do we mean by the term collaborative governance? Something that rattles off people's tongues frequently these days, lots of writing about it, and at least as many individual definitions as to what it means, how it works. And so trying to provide a little bit of order to that, I think, will help. We'll certainly look at when the use of collaboration is appropriate, when it might not be appropriate, and are there various procedures that we might urge agencies, collaborators to use in order to enhance its both practical effects and legitimacy. That panel will consist of Chris Ansel, just to show how multidisciplinary this is, a professor of political science at Berkeley. He's written a wonderful article, I think, on categorizing and deriving what we mean by collaborative governance and when it works. Lisa Bingham, who is certainly one of the prolific writers and essayers in the field, has done an awful lot in evaluation of the program. Jeff Lovers. What are we going to say about you, Jeff? Just sort of presence in all of administrative law. This is kind of one component, and one put it together. Next on the program, excuse me, is my colleague Nick Malashev of the OECD, who is not here. Unfortunately, he had personal problems, couldn't be here. He sent his deputy to be here, and somehow the deputy forgot to come. And so I got an email this morning saying, sorry. So anyhow, we have an extra time slot. Europe is not represented here. Rena Stenzer is here, sort of keeping the rest of us honest on talking about some of the concerns a lot of people have in this area. Has been sort of active.
Wave if you can hear us.
The second panel will explore implementation and enforcement of collaborative agreements. How are they implemented? Who has what kind of responsibilities and obligations? How are they enforced if they're not issued as a mandatory obligation? And does the fact that a policy was developed collaboratively alter any kind of standard of judicial review, either in practice, in theory, or in fact? That panel will consist of Neil Eisner, the Assistant General Counsel for Regulation and Enforcement and of the Department of Transportation, Michael Herz, Vice Dean and Professor of Law at Curators Law School, is active in writing about judicial review, and Errol Menninger of the University of Buffalo, if his plane ever arrives, will be here and has written a lot on public-private relationships, private forms of regulation, what it takes to do that. Tomorrow morning, we'll look at what changes might be necessary if we were really to embrace a collaborative approach. So what changes in our current institutions might be necessary to foster the greater use? So what kind of incentives, or at least removing policies, programs that inhibit its use, issues like that. And so on that panel is Don Arbuckle, currently of the University of Texas, formerly deputy director of OIRA at OMB, Bob Durant of the School of Public Affairs. Here is written on collaboration largely in the environmental area. David Rosenblum, fresh back from Hong Kong. We'll be talking about the effect largely on the bureaucracy, on government employees and whatnot. And then I regret to say that Malcolm Russell Einhorn was going to be on that panel, and he too has developed personal problems, and his mother is very ill, can't make it. I suppose one story I need to tell is that both Nick and Malcolm were colleagues of mine in China in December, and so I don't know whether to take this seriously if both of them bailed out on me or not, but whatever. Anyway, I'm sorry that they won't be there. And then the next was to be our keynote address, and to a very real extent, this whole program was built around Jody Freeman giving that address. Had it planned. She was all scheduled to be on the program. And then she has just been appointed to be the general counsel of the Energy and Environment Czar at the White House. And so it's just kind of overwhelmed, and so she's not here. As a result, the organizers of the conference said, okay, what are we going to do at this late date to find somebody to fill that slot? And we drew straws, and you guys lost. Because I got appointed, and so you got to listen to me. What can I tell you? And then the next major change is that we were very hopeful that Cass Sunstein would be here to talk about the current view from OIRA and what they had in mind, whatnot. His answer is that obviously he could only come if he had been confirmed. Well, unfortunately, he hasn't even been nominated yet, so he isn't here, and too much to our regret. And his deputy said that he would like to be here, but he is out of town tomorrow, so he won't be here either. So we're going to have a speech-free lunch tomorrow. And with that, I'd like to, I have one paid political announcement. EPA brought copies of this new book that they have just published. Brilliant book written by, any guesses? At any rate, hey, yay! At any rate, so it is available for downloading online, and there are cover sheets, David, that will be out at the table. It's gone through. Right. I'm sorry, what? Yeah, so the cover sheet, there will give instructions for downloading out there. It's gone through, I mean, I did a first draft, but it's gone through major iterations and whatnot. It sort of talks about when and how and different kinds of techniques. So with that, I'd like to introduce Neil Kerwin, now the president of American University. And every time I'm over here on a panel with him, I need to say that, we go back a long way. I express my outrage at this panel that's out here in the back that talks about the major events at the School of Government and Public Affairs, or whatever the hell you name it now. And I said, they left me out. In 1974, Harder joins as adjunct. So he's promised me that he will trash it after this session, or I will write my name in ink or something like that. But, so anyhow, Neil Kerwin.
Thanks. Thank you, Phil.
In addition to being the current president of American University, for these purposes, probably more importantly, he was formerly the dean of the School of Public Affairs. Yes.
Well, thank you, Phil. The first order of business for me is to welcome everybody to the American University campus and to this Abramson Recital Hall. This is a relatively new facility on our campus. It gets a tremendous amount of use. It welcomes distinguished groups like this one on a regular basis, but very infrequently one that's as close to my own scholarly interests as this particular session is. And for those of you who know the work of a university president, anytime anyone in my room attempts to raise money for something other than the university, I get terribly nervous. So I'll have to flog something before the end of the day, and trust me, I will. First and foremost, I'd like to thank our partners at the University of Missouri Law School and the Center for Dispute Resolution Dean Dessem and others who gave Phil the time and the freedom to work with two of my colleagues here at AU, David Rosenblum and Jeff Lubbers, to pull together the panels themselves, to try to assemble a group of experts for the audience, and to attempt to frame this session in a way that's relevant for the changes that I think we all expect to be coming in this new administration. While we're all here, though, I also want to acknowledge a very generous gift from a distinguished alumnus of the School of Public Affairs and the Washington College of Law, Howard Leah. Howard, are you here? Howard, would you raise your hand? Howard donated money to make this event possible. So, Howard, thank you very much. I think in its most general manifestations, the concept of collaboration in regulatory programs is hardly new. Ever since all of us began the work of studying the process that we're associated with, we have identified correctly that cooperation of one sort or another is ubiquitous to the regulatory process. From a historical perspective, it seems to me ever present. And now, particularly in this era when government's responsibilities so profoundly exceed the resources that they've been given to accomplish them, collaboration, cooperation at that level is nothing less than essential. My work is on rulemaking, so my comments will probably focus more heavily on the first panel than any of the others. But I do have a number of questions to pose to those that will follow these next couple of days about collaborative decision-making, in addition to the ones that are listed in the program. And I think the ones that are listed in the program are really quite well framed. Collaboration, really obviously at this point in our development as a field, is a lot more than the collection of individual agreements or individual negotiations that happen hundreds of thousands of times each year in this regulatory state of ours. Over the last couple of decades, collaboration has become effectively a movement, something that people not only practice but believe in, something people study on a quite active, if not altogether satisfactory basis. If you take the fundamental issues associated with collaboration in their most basic forms, the literature that informs it is literally vast. Everything from the formality of game theory, the formal modeling in both political science and political economy, down through some of the more modest efforts to offer case studies of individual instances where collaboration has either succeeded or it's failed. It's the role of the first panel to provide some definition to this current field by defining what it is collaboration means in 2009. But it's very important, I think, for us to step back in whatever conversations occur over the next 2 days and test what has been the very compelling premise, one that was articulated perhaps in the most seminal way in my colleague's article published in a law review in 1982 by a local university with a law school I'm told it's up and coming. But in point of fact, the key to understanding why collaboration has drawn as much time and attention from both practitioners and scholars is the simple premise that it works better than other techniques. The first question I guess that I would pose to the panels that follow is whether as scholars and practitioners we're really satisfied that the social sciences, the law, the other disciplines that have been brought to bear on the study of collaboration has demonstrated to our satisfaction that that premise is sufficiently true to justify ongoing and organized investment in the development, use, and the spread of collaborative techniques. I'm not going to attempt to preempt that answer, other than to reflect a bit on the research on that very issue that I know best, and some of the responses that stimulated. It's been nearly 10 years since my colleague Laura Langbein and I published the findings from an administrative conference-supported research project, in fact, the last piece of research sponsored by the Administrative Conference of the United States, that compared negotiated rulemaking to conventional rulemaking in EPA. At the time, it was the most rigorous study of the topic. I think it remains, in all fairness, the most rigorous study of that topic to date. And what we found, what we've published, and what we have been criticized for, is that we found negotiated rulemaking to be superior in many important respects to its conventional notice and comment counterpart. The dimensions where we found this collaborative technique to be particularly strong, in the views of those who participated directly in both processes, was the quality of the rules along several dimensions that negotiated rulemaking produced, including the perceived cost-effectiveness of the rules and the ability of the parties affected by the rules to comply with the rules' requirements. Very strongly positive assessments of the quality of information that was generated during this negotiated rulemaking process, and a high degree of satisfaction with negotiated rulemaking as a process itself. However, what Laura and I took away from that work, and that was expanded upon by Laura and Jody Freeman subsequently in other writing, was, for want of a better word, the very powerful evidence that negotiated rulemaking produces net social capital. The fact that participants in negotiated rulemaking responded to a far higher degree than their counterparts in conventional rulemaking about what they had learned about governmental processes, the respect that they had developed for those and people in government, the understanding that they had developed about their adversaries, prior adversaries, people with different points of view, and what they had learned about the implications in many cases of their own initial positions in the rulemaking. This moved Jody and Laura to write about the premium in legitimacy that negotiated rulemaking appeared to provide over its conventional counterpart. The extent to which participants in this collaborative process saw the process as fair was, in some cases, in our view, extreme. The one comment that we reproduced in this piece that was published in the Journal of Public Administration Research and Theory was a comment by a participant in what is now the much-studied wood stove rulemaking. He said that, in point of fact, as the operator of a small shop producing wood stoves, that he would be put out of business by the rule that he just participated in writing. However, he felt, on the whole, positive that he was able to participate in his own wake. Now, however, whatever a comment that might be, either on the health of the process or the health of the commenter, is beside the point. But the data that Laura and I developed during the course of this, admittedly still suggestive, admittedly still a small number of cases, is no less powerful. The extent to which this experience has been replicated in other studies of collaborative decision-making is reassuring, and it suggests that whatever else it brings to our decision-making processes, collaborative decision-making does produce a level of social capital, a level of understanding in public education that I think our political system could generally benefit from. Now, the criticism in a couple of quarters of the work was withering. In some cases, and I think that the best way to summarize it, in addition to a vector of criticism that grew more out of concern about rulemaking per se than its negotiated variant, was that Laura and I tended to focus on benefits that were essentially flimsy, not as important as those touchstones of efficiency and effectiveness that we would all also like to see in these types of studies. However, the hard data associated with true studies of efficiency in rules as they are ultimately implemented, or even effectiveness for that matter, has proven elusive. Our equivalent in our field, I suppose, of dark matter. We have submitted in those 10 years since that it's no small thing to satisfy a set of otherwise contending parties to the extent negotiated rulemaking did, or to result in the types of evaluations of information quality and process integrity that seem to arise from this work. Now, I cannot say, it's quite clear that our research didn't save the administrative conference. I would also submit that it was not the cause of its demise, at least not the entire cause of the demise. It also didn't lead to what I'd call a stampede to the use of negotiated rulemaking or having secondary effects in other areas of regulation. But I do believe that this evidence and other evidence that has begun to accumulate about collaborative decision-making is a strong indication that these techniques are deserving of support. The second question I pose then for these panels is that if our evidence is flawed, if it is still a matter of dispute as to whether collaborative decision-making has the value that so many of us place on it, what type of evidence would convince the skeptics? And how can we make the assembly and analysis of the relevant data part and parcel of the efforts that are likely to proceed in this new administration? The third question I would pose may reveal more how untethered I'd become from this field than anything else. But it spans these panels. It spans all three. And it really talks about or considers the regulatory process more holistically. If we're considering collaboration as something more than isolated instances of cooperation, a system, if you will, of decision-making, then how should we begin thinking about the relationships between collaborative techniques used at different stages of the regulatory process? It's fair, I think, to consider the regulatory process as a series of steps that are presumably sequential and where actions taken at one stage have a significant, if not determining effect on the next. Legislation, for example, is expected to set, at the very least, parameters and goals for rulemaking. Rulemaking identifies target populations and activities that in turn define the task of communicating regulatory requirements, compliance planning and management, largely by the private sector, but often in collaboration with the public sector, monitoring of regulated entities' activities and behavior, interventions short of formal enforcement, and formal enforcement. The question I pose to these two panels is, what, if anything, do we know about the cascading effects of collaboration from one of these stages to the next? Are we more likely, in a situation where we are attempting to communicate complex regulatory requirements to diverse populations, more likely to be successful using techniques that, whatever those techniques might be, are defined as collaborative than we would be otherwise? What are the interrelationships between the use of collaborative techniques in rulemaking and collaborative techniques downstream? And can whatever good that's been done at one stage through the use of collaborative techniques be systematically undone if a different approach, a different posture, a different set of techniques are used during the monitoring and enforcement stages of the process. And as the decisions in the regulatory process become increasingly specific, increasingly focused on individual firms, organizations, or persons, does collaboration continue to be a collective exercise or one that has now devolved to a simple agreement between two parties? We have seen argument in both the theoretical and empirical literatures that individual transactions between enforcing agencies and individual firms or organizations indeed should be exposed to the general type of observation and monitoring of the public affected by them. And of course, we've seen in many of these programs that very thing occurring. But the fundamental question is, if we have grown up as a community of scholars concerned and practitioners concerned with collaboration, are we treating collaboration as a system of decision-making or simply a set of isolated, unrelated activities? My fourth question arises out of the work that I did with Laura Langbine on negotiated rulemaking and has persisted in any study of rulemaking that I've conducted in my career. And it's a question of fairness that ultimately goes to legitimacy. If there was a downside, a prominent downside, in the evaluation of negotiated rulemaking that we found among otherwise satisfied participants, it was what they viewed to be the substantial costs associated with participation in collaborative processes as opposed to more conventional governmental decision-making techniques. The question of costs fell disproportionately on those less well-resourced and less well-organized. No great revelation there, but still, in an era when government decision-making is as broadly based as this is, as it affects as many parties as it does, how can we guarantee in a collaboratively based system that those with a need and a right to be at whatever table those collaborative techniques occur have been given the resources, including time and expertise, to participate effectively in the process? It's not a new issue, but it's not one that collaborative decision-making is somehow immune from addressing and immune from undertaking. What we found in our study of negotiated rulemaking, that despite the disproportionate costs borne by the smaller firms, the smaller organizations, they nonetheless felt very strongly in their assessments, positive assessments, of negotiated rulemaking. It's not, obviously, an insurmountable problem, but an era of tight money and economic hardship across the economy, the question of access, the question of fairness, the question of participation looms, it seems to me, especially large. Ensuring against disenfranchisement in these collaborative systems strikes me as an absolutely critical variable in retaining whatever benefit derives in terms of legitimacy. The fifth question is what must be, I guess, by regulation now, required of every seminar of this sort, and what does electronic participation bring to the table? A very superficial read of the literature on electronic rulemaking and the use of electronic communication techniques in collaborative decision-making makes it very plain that the promise is immense. The justification often given for second and third generation use of web technology is that it will bring government to the people, people to the government, and ease some of the obstacles that I mentioned just a moment ago to the otherwise poor or poorly resourced to participate in the process. What does the literature, how can we extend the findings of this literature to answer some of the issues and questions raised earlier about participation, and does the promise of electronic participation really does hold the potential and promise we had hoped. My last observation is one related to the very document that Phil showed you at the start of the session, is that if collaboration is indeed a movement, if indeed it is a set of techniques that will improve the regulatory process across the board, who will educate and train the public and private collaborators, and on what set of principles will they be educated? It is abundantly clear to me that in general, the preparation of men and women in the public service who engage in one element of this regulatory process, rulemaking, is woefully inadequate. I've spoken in different fora at different times on this same point. We have in rulemaking an extension of the lawmaking power that was enshrined as the single most important in our Constitution by the founders. We delegate massive authorities in every piece of legislation to agencies to conduct rulemaking, and we impose on those agencies huge expectations, huge demands, huge burdens, with little or no consideration for the resources needed to do the job correctly. Of all the things that agencies need to do this work, and there are many, including exceptionally high-quality information, a trained, an educated, and frankly sophisticated staff could not be more important. In my experience, which is, of course, just mine, in dealing with agencies across the government, the ability of men and women to learn the task of rulemaking is very much random. It is high irony that the most important power-given agencies of government has not even been identified formally by the Office of Personnel Management as a true specialty with regard to personnel development and movement. It seems to me that if the techniques that are outlined in that document and many others, techniques that have proven to be effective in a variety of settings where collaboration is appropriate, that needs to be one very important set of tools put at the disposal of these next generation of rulemakers. But it's not going to happen by itself. It's not going to happen without an organized effort on behalf of institutions like mine that educate the next generation of public officials in its MPA programs, or without the assistance of formal training programs in agencies themselves. So one issue, it seems to me, that might come out of these next 2 days is what set of objectives should the government set for itself in preparing men and women to undertake this type of work in future governments. Now, I think that we are all expecting, whatever our political point of view, a very different regulatory process from this administration than we've seen for the past decade. One thing that hasn't changed a great deal, in my view, over the past decade, is the capacity, the infrastructure, the ability of this government to meet even the existing expectations and demands for new regulation. The gap between capability and expectation will grow inevitably as this government, this administration, articulates higher levels of expectation across a variety of regulatory programs. The crisis I perceive has as much to do with high-quality information as it does with anything else. It seems to me the ability of government to independently develop high-quality information with the resources it has solely at its disposal is today severely limited. The best hope we have is a system with high integrity that ensures the free flow of information across these sectors. The evidence I've seen suggests that collaborative decision-making techniques hold great hope for ensuring that this flow of information is both free and does have integrity, and it is, in my view, the reason why a conference of this sort is not only justified but can do considerable good as this brand new administration attempts to decide exactly how it will organize itself with regard to fundamental principles. So I want to wish you all the best for a productive conference. We're all welcome across the street. Was it 6 o'clock, Phil, I guess, for a reception at my office. And in the meantime, all the best for a productive 2 days.
Thank you, sir.
Good.